Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Stanley. Again.
Yes. You see, last time we had you, we were in a very small box.
Yeah.
And I did not like that.
Things have expanded, I see.
I'm telling you. And today you have a nice chair that you're sitting on.
Thank you.
Nice studio, warm. But thank you for making the time. I know it's been a very hectic week for you with the African Futures conference that you've been doing. But yes, I hope you're not tired.
I'm a bit tired, but this is exciting. So I'm happy to still be here in conversation. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Zandi, welcome to the Angle podcast, and thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you.
All right. So let's get into this. Tayarisha Center at the Wits School of Governance has commissioned 20 papers on AI in Africa. Why now? Why is it important to commission so many papers around AI in Africa?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, obviously AI is the hot topic.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about it. I don't know if all of us know what we're talking about. And so research can be useful. And that's, I think, one of the reasons.
Yeah.
And in fact, conversations like this are really important for me because there's a way that conversation happens sometimes that makes people feel like they can't participate or they don't know something. Or they pretend they know something based on maybe a headline they read or a tweet or whatever. And I think we want, as an African institution, to be able to contribute some useful knowledge, some useful information that at least is a little bit credible. I mean, it's hard to say these days in a world of fake facts and alternative
fakes and all
exactly. But we have researchers, we have scholars, and we have a bit of a privilege of being able to have access to a little bit of funding.
Yeah.
So what we've tried to do as Tayarisha at Wits that is focused on issues of the digital is to say, well, look, let's put out calls around topics that we think are relevant. This particular series, which is our second volume, we said would be around the politics and governance of AI. Ask scholars to bid with interesting topics. So that already allows us to see what researchers think are interesting and important topics for us to be thinking about.
Yeah.
And then to make sure that once they've done that work and we interact with them, that it's popularized. So actually conversations like this are part of the point of it, which is to get people engaging with the content. We're trying to get beyond, people do theses and people do writing in academic journals anyway. But that has a very particular tone and audience, which often is not the public. And so this has been about trying to get beyond those kind of very closeted conversations to saying, can we engage with business? Can we engage with regular citizens? Can we engage with government as well? Because I think sometimes they're also in that category of not fully knowing what they're talking about.
Amen. There's something that happened a couple of weeks ago that tells that our government might not know very much.
But that might come up.
Yeah, well, this is definitely going to come up. So if I'm new to the world of research and I'm wondering, what does it mean to research a topic? In my experience, you tell me AI in Africa, do a research. I'm going online. I'm picking up some LLM and I'm going, what is AI in Africa? How does it work? So what goes into the process of somebody researching a particular topic?
Yeah. So for most of the people responding to a call like this, they have an interest field already. So there's already something they're doing. So for example, the set of papers we'll probably talk about today, it's a mix of people there's one guy who's been researching smart cities for the last 10 years. So what this allows him to do is to focus in on the issue of AI and digital, and what does that have to do with the research he's already doing? Yeah. So he's not going to start with a general search on an LLM. He might go into an LLM, but to ask very specific questions. So I think often what goes into it, first of all, is finding alignment to your own research topic. If you've been doing health research, if you've been doing governance research, trying to align it to the topic. And then very importantly is thinking, what knowledge are you going to add to this? So the literature review is a very important part of that. As we've learned recently, we cannot rely on the AI to do our literature reviews for us because it can make up things. So there's a lot of
references that don't exist.
The traditional methods that have to go into just checking to make sure because you might have what you think is a brilliant idea, only to find it's already researched. That very often happens. So the literature tells you where the gaps are. Then, of course, you have to figure out what specific angle you're coming in on and what methods you're going to use. And I think the set we'll look at today have actually used different methods.
Okay.
So some people might do more online research. So their topic might be a combination of whatever others have already written on the issue. Others might say, no, case studies. I want to look at countries that have been doing this thing and I want to see how they've been doing it or how they've performed. Others might go and interview people and get, opinions. So there are many different ways for people to research it, but I think it comes from having a good and useful research question that contributes to knowledge, tells us something we don't already know.
Okay, cool. A bit about you. I've always been wondering, I look up to you, right?
Thanks.
Quite a lot. Your work ethic, how you conduct a lot. So when I went into your bio on LinkedIn, there was a phrase that stood out. Said journeying through late stage scholar practitioning in strange times. What does that mean?
Exactly. I think I'd just been watching something on Netflix and, people go on about late stage capitalism. And I was like, no, I'm going through other late stages. No, I think, look, I've been in academia now for over 30 years, not as young as some of you.
Hey.
And you learn a lot, but you also learn that you have to unlearn a lot because, you kind of go into academia thinking that you're going to learn all of the things you don't know and especially as Africans, we are primed to think we don't know.
Right.
So we're going into institutions to be told things we don't know. But at some point you begin to realize, actually, I knew something or my people knew something. And now I came here and I was emptied out and filled with other things. And actually some of these things are suspect, but you only begin to realize the deeper you go.
As you go.
And so there's a lot of becoming an expert, I think, in academia, which is problematic. And so I feel like I'm in those late stages of questioning some of the knowledges I had, trying to find and reconnect in some cases with people or with ways of knowing that I think are not included in academia. And in that sense, it's really a journey. So it's a journey of learning and then unlearning and relearning and trying to figure out what is it that we need to do and what are the limits of academia.
Right. Is this why you moved from civic tech into academia, almost like from activism into the very institutions that one would imagine one is sort of going against?
I wouldn't say I've moved. So I always call myself a scholar-practitioner. And I think for me that has to do with valorizing both. So I worked in the public sector and the civic space for a while. And I remember when I was there, because I was already then doing my PhD and stuff like that. So I was already in academia as well. And people used to say that I was too academic in those spaces, maybe because I'd say something people didn't understand or I'd bring in something. Then, I came into academia and then they felt I was too practice oriented. I'm too on the ground. So then but it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing to find yourself that you're too hood and you're too bougie at the same time, because then you can begin to use both. And so I wouldn't say I've moved. I still call myself a scholar practitioner, and I hope that there are aspects from each that add value to the other. For sure, academia can't be left to carry on the way it has in the North. I think we don't need in Africa a form of academia that's ivory tower, that's people using big words nobody understands, prioritizing theory over people's lived experiences. That I don't think that's useful for Africa. I think we need to know theory. I think we need to have an idea about how to structure knowledge and how to know and how to maybe concretize some things. So that's useful, and I'm glad that I have it, and I'm glad many people are studying that, but it's not enough.
True.
Yeah.
All right.
What do you think we are missing?
I think connection. So the event that Stanley is referring to this week that we had at Tsimorohong was very much about inviting us in the way we think about ourselves in the future to be whole beings, to reconnect to what your grandmother taught you, to reconnect to what in your cells you feel that there are things in your culture. We talk about indigenous knowledge and decoloniality and all of that, but all of us have a lived knowledge and a lived experience and a cultural heritage that we are made to feel is separate from what you do when you go into a classroom. And I think we're missing that. I think we're missing this very organic ability to show up as a whole self. I really worry sometimes, even in class, I don't teach very much, but when I do teach at Wits, and other places. I teach at other places as well across the country. I sometimes look at young people, especially young Black people, and I get worried because I think we come in and we're made to feel less. And so people are scared to ask a question, or people are scared to tell the story that tells how they understand the thing because it feels like maybe it's not clever enough or it's not going to. And you see others roll their eyes, or maybe even the professor tear down the person, which further makes the person feel that they're not enough. I think it's changing. I hope it's changing. I used to see it, I think it was worse, but I think we're missing that. I think we're missing the valorizing of that young person, wherever they're coming from, whatever their background, whatever they've read or not read, to understand that they're bringing something into the room and that matters for scholarship. That's how we build relevant scholarship. So I think that being validated, being made to feel that you have agency and you have knowledge, obviously you have to add on to it, but that you're bringing something. I think we're missing that.
All right. Cool. I don't think we can start this conversation without tapping into one of the big news that came out of our country. So, South Africa has gazetted a national AI policy.
This is when I drink.
And unfortunately, that failed. And how it fails is, turns out some of the references did not exist. I went through it, but as a layman, I couldn't pick up anything wrong. I was just like, oh, this was some good stuff. I'm even making notes. So my question here is, what should I be looking for in a national AI policy? If I'm reading this thing, I'm going, our country is working on something great. What am I looking for?
You mean in order to know that it has or hasn't been produced by using AI?
No, just to know. Look, just to know that it's a solid document that the country can face the world with. So we have governed this thing and we've governed it very well.
Well, to answer that question about what should we be looking for in a policy, and I think you might know that I was part of the NACI process and the working group that actually had developed a policy framework that was not used. So anyway,
AI was used.
Sour grapes. I think you have to look for a couple of things. I personally think you have to look at, first of all, who produced this. What knowledges went into producing this? Because that itself will tell you what and whose interests it represents. There's a lot about policy in general and AI in particular that's got to do with power and control. So I think that matters. So who's producing this? Why now? And in a way also that links to methods. What methods were used to produce this? And I raise that specifically because one of the things we tried to do, without sounding like sour grapes, one of the things we tried to do with the NACI process was to be a little bit inclusive. I mean, there was a large committee of like over 40 people and institutions. There was an effort at least to see that civil society is somehow covered in this. So I wouldn't say it was fully kind of co-produced with society at all, in fact, but it made an effort at least to cover a broad base, which I think is not the case in the other one. And so I think you want to look for that. You want to look for whose ideas, whose knowledge, whose interests does this represent. The second thing I think you want to look for is it speaking to the issues that matter to people? Not the issues that matter to corporates or the issues that matter to government or the issues that matter to certain actors. But when I yourself, is it speaking to the issues that matter to you? And I think if it doesn't, and I believe for me, I mean, you're not asking me to critique it, but for me, one of the issues with this policy framework that had come out, I don't know that it spoke enough to that because we need to be protected for sure. So ethics, AI safety for sure is important. And I think even it began to speak a little bit to the human-centeredness of AI. Exactly. But did it speak to the fact that we just had figures that came out, was it last week or the week before, that tells us about unemployment figures? I mean, guys, we're in trouble.
Terrible.
So tell me, how are we going to get out of the economic trouble we're in? And not just the macroeconomy, but like on a household level, people are struggling.
Terribly
People are struggling.
So making it any easier.
Right. So did this policy tell you anything that showed you how we were going to turn that around using this wonderful new technology that's out there? And I think those kinds of things matter. I mean, you know, Stanley, that I've been talking about, we need to talk about how we not just a space for data extraction and AI consumption, which is kind of exactly what I think we are right now, and talk about how do we get to doing the things we need to do? How do we improve people's livelihoods? How can people innovate with AI? How can you innovate with AI and do something better or different? Not just to like write your documents for you for your essay, but like actually to be productive.
Draft an email.
No, not drafting an email. Like how can you actually improve your own social position, financial position, economic prospects using this new technology? How can you actually build your own technology? Why are you only consuming it? Why are you only on ChatGPT when you don't even know what a GPT is?
What's the GPT part of this?
Exactly. So I think that side, I think you should be looking for as well. You should be looking for how does this help us get on, not just how does this help us use it and buy another thing, because we've been extracted from, we've been a market for other people's stuff. We have to be careful that we're not also being relegated to more of that and being told that it will just be protected from damage, but otherwise just consume.
All right, with that, I'd like to get into the first paper, at least on my list. I hope it's the first paper on your list.
Yeah, I brought mine in paper, so sorry, I'm very analog in some things.
Hey, man, you did say you are many years older than me and Zandi, so.
I didn't say many, but okay. let's say.
The first paper I have is AI Governance in Developing Economies.
Yeah.
So what this paper is about is the conceptual anchor of what Melin, the name of the author I might butcher.
Koliswa,
Malindini. Yes. So she compares AI governance across the US, the AU, China, South Africa, Rwanda, Nigeria, and Kenya, and asks rather a deceptively simple question: who benefits from the governance framework that exists? And who builds them? Essentially, that's what she's asking in this question. The paper's core finding is that AI governance in Africa is simultaneously a development question and a sovereignty question. One of the findings in the paper is all 4 countries studied get about 80 to 90% of their cloud services from foreign vendors. The continent's AI infrastructure is overwhelmingly owned by Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Oracle, and Hawaii, which is, again, to your point, data extraction. Every governance framework sits on top of this dependency. Now, my question to you is, if I'm governing and this is the picture we're faced with, what am I governing?
Yeah.
So there is foreign technology, infrastructure, products already in the market, and my job is to govern, is to create some regulation. How do I even approach that?
Well, how do you approach it? So one of the things we have done is we've gone back to those very same vendors and asked them to capacity build us so that we know how to govern. So you'll find that it is the same Googles, the same Huawei, well, I can't say Huawei, but the same Googles, the same Amazon Web Services that are the ones that have offered the training to the people who are responsible for governing the platforms and for governing the space. So already there you can see wherein the problem lies. Maybe it's not surprising because I think we are getting to a space where the technology, and here academia also has to take a bit of the blame, because if academia is where we were looking for our skills to come from, it hasn't kept pace with, and maybe academia is not built to do that. So technology is changing so fast.
So fast, yes.
Academia itself, especially lately, and you've seen, I mean, the issues with plagiarism and whatever in the academic space. So academia itself is battling with AI challenges. So it itself is developing its own policies. And if we are meant to be the ones capacity building for the officials who then have to govern, I think there are many instances recently where we've also been a step behind. Not necessarily a step behind in terms of knowledge, because they're extremely knowledgeable people. I mean, Wits, we've got the whole Mind Institute. We've got some of the top AI minds on the continent and a network of them across Africa. But that's not necessarily the community that can or has then told the governance people how to act, where to be. So we see now, by the way, in the new AI panel that's just been announced. So Benji Rosman, who heads up the Mind Institute at Wits, which is really great, is actually now the chairperson of that panel. I think that's encouraging because it's telling you a person who is in the top 100 AI minds in the world from South Africa is chairing a committee that hopefully can help us get somewhere. But why didn't that happen like a few years back when we needed it, you know? So I think there's been a tendency for the guidance to come from the same people who we rely on for the tech, then we rely on them to tell us how to regulate them. And I think that's never a good, that's never a good mix.
It's not. It's almost like how we got the national AI policy wrong. We went to AI and said, hey, buddy, can you help me?
Ask AI, how do I govern you?
How do I
It's
govern
not a
you?
bad tactic. I mean, AI is pretty... but yeah, I mean, there are issues with that. I mean, the other problem is that, and I think this is an endemic African government. I think it's an old problem. I think it's an African problem. We've got an AU that had developed a framework for how we think about digital, right, and AI sometime back, which is good. However, who funds the AU and who are the experts advising the AU? Again, unfortunately, you find it's the very same people. So then it's not surprising that even in maybe the more legitimate parts of our policy framework here, it was heavily influenced by the EU AI Act and stuff like that. And what that means, again, and I think one of our papers speaks to this issue, is the development and use of frameworks that can't really apply here because things are different here.
Yes.
And therefore, we don't take the time or maybe have the understanding to develop for our own conditions. We borrow from not just those who are ahead of us, but those who are funding us. And then you wonder why their interests are embedded in what we think is the policy direction. So what do they say? Who plays the pipe? Well, who pays the piper calls the tune.
There you go.
And I think we're very caught in that. I think we're very caught in that. So we've got a continent that doesn't fund itself. And therefore, if you're funding me and then you tell me, and I think the best way you should do things is this, and in fact, I will send you the expert who is now going to also help you, advise you on it. There's not that much difference between just asking the AI, what do you think?
That is true. That is true. That is true. But then that begs the question, who is developing Africa AI future? And what are they using? Are we going to develop frameworks? Excuse me. Are we going to develop frameworks that will truly benefit the African continent, or are we going to inherit someone else's policy and values and contribute to their economy?
Absolutely. And you come back then to the extraction consumption. So we've done this with our natural resources.
Now we're doing it.
And I think we're about to do it with our data and our data features. However, I mean, coming back to Collie's paper, I think that she does give us some ideas and some pointers about where we could go. I think this point about stakeholder inclusion. So as much as people think they don't know, like regular people don't know about AI, regular people know what's important to them and regular people know what they're trying to do. Timolofong, where we were yesterday, startups are trying to do stuff. There's people out in the streets who are trying to do stuff. So I think that, I mean, although I think she does warn that stakeholder inclusion on its own is not enough, you've got to have other things happen. I do think there are some ideas here about how we can be more developmental and more sovereign in how we look at these AI future questions. So I don't think it's how we're doing it right now, but I think a paper like this is beginning to signal, hey guys, sovereignty matters, your future matters, and therefore you need to do things a bit differently.
And how should we be thinking about sovereignty? This question around sovereignty it's a tricky one, man.
And you heard the US saying that they're not going to support any countries that are focused on sovereignty.
He uses a bully.
I mean, imagine that. Imagine somebody telling you, you don't need to be sovereign. Don't worry about that.
We've got you. Relax. We are big brother. We are watching.
And there's a case they can make for it. I mean, I guess the language they couched it in was that it's inefficient for everybody to want to do their own thing.
Yeah.
But of course, what then follows is therefore do my thing.
Now,
that's the part that's,
You want to build your economy off of my back. That's what you're trying to do. You want to extract my data so you can sell me products. Not a chance.
Exactly.
Back off.
Exactly.
But how should we be thinking about sovereignty in this sense? When the Amazon servers are in Cape Town and my data is stored in Cape Town, can the country claim data sovereignty from that perspective? Or for us to truly claim sovereignty, we need to have local built platforms, local built servers, and only in that way can we claim sovereignty.
Look, I think we have to have local build. And so I'm a very big proponent of innovation and us having to build our own capabilities and our own tech.
Yeah.
I think that's something that outfits like DAIRE, D-A-I-R-E, speak about. The problem is it takes money. It takes investment. And then you've got to ask whether domestically, are we investing in those things? You'll be speaking to Eugenio, I think, later in this series, and Prof Gangledori. And one of the things I think he has mentioned in the past is that, in a way, okay, so your question is, can we be sovereign if we are dependent on their infrastructure?
Right, even though they are here.
Yeah, but one of the things he says is that we are, I think, the only place in the world where, for example, there is a Chinese server and a US server in the same building. It's unheard of.
Right.
So my answer would be, actually, you can if you are clever and if you know what it is that you are doing.
Okay.
Because if that's the meaning of us having those two and managing to negotiate something as complicated as that, I would ask, how did we manage to do it and why did we do it? And if it's because we were being tactical and we were saying that, okay, we're going to hedge bets and therefore we're going to use both, not either or, but we have a plan for what we're doing, then I would say, great, you're being clever. You're using what you've got, but you've got a sense of what you're going to actually be doing. That's kind of, I mean, if being in the game is a thing, then you're in the game. But I think if you're just blindly doing it because you don't want to invest in your own stuff, there's an analogy somebody was using the other day when they were saying, you know, when you invite somebody to your home, and maybe they bring some stuff because we need to eat. So they bring some bananas and they bring some things. But if they then become the ones who are telling you what recipes we're going to cook tonight, if they then tell us how we're going to dress for dinner and who's going to sit where, next thing they're taking your husband or your wife.
Yeah.
You know?
God.
Exactly. Then you really got to ask a question, not just how sustainable is this, but is this right? Is this what I want? Is this
good?
So what does it mean to be sovereign in your home? And I think you could almost use that metaphor of what does it mean to be sovereign in your home when you have other people you've invited, even if you're depending on them for something. What does it mean to be sovereign in your home? Because you can be sovereign and they can still bring something.
Right.
Or they can bring something and take over your home. And I think we are a little bit on over-reliance on the visitors.
That is a scary thought. That is a scary thought. What do you think? Can we manage this data sovereignty thing?
If Africa is in no position to actually invest in their own data centers, I don't think digital sovereignty is possible.
So then we are back to reliance on foreign
companies.
Vendors. Yes. Kenya, however, of the 4 countries that are cited in this study, Kenya seems to be coming out at the top. What can we learn from Kenya? How did they get it right? I mean, this is motherland for you.
You know, policy is a tricky space and development is a tricky field, I think. Let me step back from AI for a minute to talk about another thing we tried to learn from Kenya some time back, which was around dealing with informal economy, which you don't do very well in South Africa.
Oh, no.
And so at a time, there was this view that, Kenya has a very vibrant informal economy. It's called Jua Kali. And they've somehow managed to get these informal entrepreneurs, not just traders, but actually manufacturers and all sorts of other innovators. And somehow they are actually part of the real economy. And it really is that. If you visit Kenya, you'll see and feel it. And the question is, how can South Africa do that? How can we almost have not a 2-tier economy, meaning a real economy and a poor one, but how could we really have an economy where both of them are valid? And then we went to try to learn from Kenya. And probably about 20, 30 years ago, I was marginally involved in some of that work. And I remember telling them it's very difficult to learn policy lessons from a place where the thing you're trying to learn may have actually been the result of policy failure, not necessarily of policy intent, like something structured and systematic that said, let's validate these guys. So now you're trying to do it formally, but you're trying to learn from somebody who didn't do it formally. It can be tricky.
Yes.
So I always say when you want to learn, you have to be careful what can be learned, because you also have to look at how the thing happened. I think Kenya has always been a little bit ahead in the tech game, and we know any place you go around innovation, people bring up M-Pesa. To say it's the one case study everybody refers to. So all sorts of things around mobile money, mobile tech. There's a whole mobile savannah. There are smart city projects, even though they're not some of them real. The Kwanzaa cities and all of that. And so Kenya, in a way, has been flagged as a sort of digital innovation a lead. Right. I think probably them and Rwanda, which is also a case study in this paper for different reasons. I'm not sure that I'm not sure how sustainable Kenya's trajectory is, first of all.
Okay.
And I think they have been a bit faster than us at trying to develop policy and to think about things. But I think actually they've had many of the same conditions of reliance on external actors. You might have seen also in the media some of the things that come out around the role of external actors, external interests, external VC and all of that in Kenya. So I don't know if Kenya is as good a formative case for us as you might be suggesting. I'm not sure. Are they slightly ahead of us for now? Yes.
Okay, but what is the context in Kenya that would make make them be a bit ahead like this? And I ask in this sense, the political landscape in South Africa is different. The tech landscape is different, and I bet compared to Kenya as well. M-Pesa, I think, worked because you had one ubiquitous MNO in Safaricom. If the MNO had 80% of the population as their subscriber, obviously building a mobile tech onto that network will generally just penetrate the entire Kenya, the country of Kenya. But if you come to South Africa, where you have about 5 telcos,
but Kenya has others as well. It was never only Safaricom. Even now, it's not only Safaricom.
Yeah, but
but they're big. They're big.
They're big. Yeah, right? Yeah. The point is, they have a huge share of the market. So once you build a solution there, it's most likely to be used by the majority of the country.
Yeah.
But here in South Africa, you don't have one big. So a solution built on an MNO would not work as much as an M-Pesa would in Kenya. So that landscape is different and it calls for different things. So innovation in South Africa will be stifled in that sense because telcos are innovating for their own subscribers. It's not a shared kind of innovation and product. So that landscape I find is different. So what I'm trying to figure out is, what does the landscape in Kenya look like such that policy thrives, innovation thrives? How are they getting it right such that do we need to change the context, or we really can't borrow from them because context is different?
No, I think we can learn some things. I think it's a question of what can you learn.
Right.
I think also the M-Pesa story in South Africa, yes, I think it might be about the MNOs, but it might also be about the banking sector and the financial sector itself and how it's regulated and protected. And I think that was slightly different in Kenya, quite different in Kenya. I'm also not sure if an M-Pesa today in Kenya would be as feasible. It's always, early, first one to do it.
First one to do it.
And then, of course, government is a major stakeholder in Safaricom, although I think they've sold some of their stake recently. But I think there are small and big reasons. The small and sometimes understated reasons are the issue around capacity and skill. So Kenya, I think, relatively speaking, and I don't just mean in the general space, I mean also in the space of governance, I think has generally had people who are highly skilled, including in tech space. And I think that mattered as well. Because it means you've got people who can understand things and move things quite quickly. And I'm not quite sure, even now, I'm a bit suspect in our space here about how many of our leaders really understand the tech we're asking them to regulate for. So that's a question. I think also maybe, and it's not a bad thing here that we regulate things, because I think it's protected South Africa in some important ways. And I think we have to continue thinking about how we regulate. This DCDT policy was very strong on governance and compliance and institutions and formality. I think places that aren't as heavy-handed as that and aren't as sort of bureaucratized as that are able to move a bit faster and to do things. But of course, you can also move faster and break things, as we are told, and you can break important things. It's not fun to just say you can break things. So I do think that there's something about our tendency to big companies and big bureaucracy and heavy-handedness does make it difficult for us to be agile in ways that places like Rwanda can be by being authoritarian.
Yes.
So democracy has its limits.
Yes.
Or places like Kenya, where I think sometimes things happen because of a kind of a flexibility that can be problematic. And so here, maybe we're glad we're not that flexible. But it does allow you to move certain things. So I think South Africa has a dilemma to face, and it's going to be this issue of, are we going to be, in a way, dealing with AI through compliance and regulation only, or are we also going to talk about what are the conditions we need to create for innovation? And we've not so far been very good at managing both. Hence the case I was mentioning about the informal economy.
Right.
We struggle. I don't think we have any idea what to do with the informal economy.
No, we don't. And it's actually a huge economy.
Yeah.
Struggling to formalize it. I mean, how many jobs will be created from there? But until we formalize that...
Well, or deal with it, because as we talk about losing jobs and people falling out of the formal economy, unless you assume people are doing nothing, they're probably falling into the informal economy.
And you're not able to track
I think you can think about how that could be okay. I mean, how could we somehow make that work for people? But instead of thinking about that, I think we still want to keep banking on, the big formal.
And I think the content creation space is also teetering on informal and formal.
Absolutely. In fact, we had a very interesting conversation with, I don't know if I should, let me not mention the company, but with one of these big tech-based companies. It's not a shame thing. Actually, it's a good thing.
Nice.
You might even guess based on the case who it is. But one of these tech-based companies in South Africa, we were in conversation with them about civic tech.
Okay.
And the conversation we were having was to say, we talk about informal economy as though it's just the fruit and veg seller on the road. But actually, informal economy is a huge part of the creative economy in South Africa. So people who are in arts and creative spaces, including digital, not just, people who are, playing a guitar or something like that. And then also including people who are, in fact, doing a lot of tech developments are very informal.
Yes.
If I look at maybe the person I get to do my graphic design or to build my website, I'm not going to, I don't know, Google and asking them to develop my website.
Chances are even paying them to that personal account, not a business account.
Absolutely. And they're working out of home or they're working out of a space somewhere. So there's not much difference, in fact, between that person and the fruit and veg seller.
No, there isn't.
And this company was interested because they were also interested in how people in their space are also, in a way, informal entrepreneurs on some level. And they wanted to see, how do we talk about the fact that our dispensations for labor law and whatever don't consider such. So if you, and if they do, if the government wants to see you, often it's from the perspective of, okay, how do we tax you? Now, we're not interested in saying, like, I'm already hand to mouth. I'm not trying to show myself so you can tax me. But if you believe I'm contributing to the economy, which is better than me being unemployed, how can you support me? How can you enable the work? I'm not stealing. I'm not,
I'm an honest citizen.
I'm an honest citizen, but I'm coding in my pajamas, or I'm selling things on the road, or I'm driving cars, whatever it is people are doing. So the question would be, how can we have an ecosystem that doesn't disable people who are not just super formalized?
Right. And help them formalize in a way that doesn't punish them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even use the word formalize. Help validate them, help valorize them. The problem with formalize, it sounds like forcing them into a code of practice, which they may not agree with. Civic tech space is interesting often because many people in the civic tech space don't believe in those rules. So they don't want to have that kind of business model. So in a way, they're a bit anti-capitalist. So it becomes difficult to say formalize because they may resist some of what you would have to agree to in order to say you are formal in this world. And I'm okay with that. I don't know if the country is, but I think we need to find ways to deal with that. That if there are people who don't want to conform to that code, but what they're doing is actually legit and useful, how can we, like I was saying, how can we coexist? How can we create an environment that works for South Africans, not that works for formality? We're not interested in formality. We're not here for that. You know, and in a way, I think, okay, this is going to be controversial. In a way, I think the advent of an EFF back when EFF started its disruption of Parliament, for example, there was a moment there where I really appreciated that questioning, that saying, what is the value of formal proceedings if people are suffering? We can't be saying we are, you know, wearing cloaks and carrying icons, exactly, honorable member, when this shenanigan is not really addressing issues. And obviously there's a limit to disruption, maybe.
Of course.
But I am saying, I think there is something that needs to be disrupted in these codes of formality.
So it's not about the alternative economy, it's about a parallel economy.
Parallel, alternative, hybrid, diversified, something needs to change.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think about the creator economy? Should it be shoehorned into what is known as formal, or should it be left to what it is and supported differently to what the so-called formal economy is?
I think it should be left as what it is. But I don't understand the concept of having to pay tax. Well,
okay.
While sometimes you don't even have a formal contract with some brand deals, and mostly with South African brands. Yeah, they don't have formal contracts unless it's through an agency. Well, that's according to my experience. Yeah. And I prefer working with international brands because they are also very professional, and they would have a formal contract with a very detailed brief.
So are you saying for the international contract, you don't mind being taxed?
It's the local ones that are a problem.
Yeah, it's the local ones because they pay less.
Okay, that's an interesting take. However, back to South Africa, we are not doing so badly in some instances. I think the Poppy Act is one of our strong forms of governance, but I struggle to see how it translates in this era of AI. Have you interrogated the Poppy Act and how it translates in this era of AI?
Yeah, maybe 2 comments I'd make about that. I've actually got a PhD student right now who's looking at the Poppy Act in relation to health sector and specific issues. And I think there have been some obviously critiques of Poppy in the sense that it's very also modeled obviously against the European framework. And there have been questions about whether it perhaps is ignoring some of its impact on outcomes that are more important to us. So if health outcomes are important, and if Poppy perhaps is negatively affecting health outcomes by creating levels of bureaucracy, then how can we be more balanced, right? But I also want to respond to that in relation to, I think, one of the recommendations of Koliswa's paper, ironically, which is to say that I think the language she uses is that we need to have countermeasures. Structural countermeasures to the big AI moves, right? And one of them she mentions is issues like data protection and stuff like that. So she says, how can we develop, not necessarily at the level just of the AI policy, but in how we govern data or very specific constituent parts of what we need for AI, how do we govern those in a way that's locally relevant and counters negative impacts of the way the big development happens? I think that's very important. Of course, it would assume that Poppy is an adequate countermeasure. Is it built for local relevance? Is it going to protect people? And if it is, then I think what the author is suggesting is that could be one of the ways for us to survive or thrive even in a digital age and be sovereign, is by saying that, so let me come back to the house analogy. So maybe what we say in our house is, okay, we can't create broad regulation that say all visitors can only act in these ways because we may want visitors to do different things. But we can at least say that the table is always set by the children of this house. Therefore, that is very clear about who sets the table and where people sit in this house. So that already protects you because that's a principle, that's a value that you hold.
Yes.
You might also have values around the relationships in that house that, whatever the partnership is, husband and wife, whatever it is, that these are the heads of this home and they are the ones who are going to make any decision about this or that. So that's also encoded. So I think that idea that, for example, how we protect information is one of the important, not just pillars, but also structural countermeasures to being taken over by something external, I think is quite important.
Since most African countries now have cybersecurity laws like POPI, but they focus on old traditional threats and not AI-specific dangers like fake videos. So is cybersecurity the forgotten cousin of AI governance?
So it's included. So cybersecurity, I think, is sort of mentioned and is important. And in this paper, I think it is one of the things that's looked at. But I do think there's something very important in what you are saying. And I have a master's student, I think, who's looking at the role of the information regulator in relation to, so we have POPIA, which is about information protection. But then there is this other thing about cybersecurity and other threats. And I think what this student is trying to do is to explore whether, in fact, there might actually be gaps in how we're thinking about cybersecurity and who, in fact, is responsible for it. So it's also a bit of an institutional question. So I do think that there are some issues. Cybersecurity is an interesting one because it may sound like it's a purely defensive issue, meaning you're just worried about whether you're going to be hacked or whether you're going to be victimized. And I think that's an important aspect of it. But I think there's a bigger context that relates as well to sovereignty and relates to infrastructure and preparedness that really has to be thought through and managed quite carefully, but also is a space for innovation. And being able to think ahead and being able to, so I think it is important that we do more to think about cybersecurity and have more robust, not just documents, but also an institutional sense of who's actually responsible for this stuff. I think it's problematic. Yeah.
So the paper also makes a nice and interesting argument here for localized, indigenous, sovereignty preserving AI governance. But I think there's a risk. There's a risk here of some kind of governance nationalism where we are closing ourselves from other countries and potentially global standards. Do you find that's a real problem that we could be facing with this? Or we can just be all right by just us doing for us without considering global standards?
You know, it's funny because often that's the binary that we get presented with, right? Is that either we do things our own way or we comply to a global standard. And I don't think it has to be an either or.
Okay.
And in fact, maybe it is in digging into what we mean by our indigenous way that might hold the answer. Because in that, we may find that we've never been about being an island. That's not the African way.
Just not the African way.
Exactly.
Yes.
So maybe there's no problem.
Yes, we are.
Yeah. So maybe there's no problem. Maybe if we did things our way, we would still find our points of resonance with the global standard, but it would be in our way. You know? And so I think sometimes that's overstated and then we're made to think, no, so therefore definitely start from the global standard. No, I think start by who you are.
Right.
Yeah, start by who you are. And in our case, fortunately, who we are is Ubuntu, and who we are is hospitable.
Yes.
And who we are, who we really are, not who we show up as sometimes, but who we really are. And I'm saying that in the context of obviously the country right now is in a place where we are showing another side of ourselves, which can be to be inhospitable and to act like we are in combat with other Africans and stuff like that. But I don't think that's who we really are. Yeah. I think who we really are can coexist with other people. Who we are is to understand abundance, but who we are is to also understand that we also have values, we also have culture, and those things can matter as well. Being diverse doesn't mean not being yourself. Being globalized doesn't mean not having any sovereignty or your own house. It doesn't mean that. So I think sometimes we, there's something about confidence, I think, that allows people to be a bit more generous. You are not very generous if you're not confident. If you don't know where your next meal is coming from, you're probably less likely to offer the meal that you have to somebody else. You're probably less likely to stand up for yourself because you're not sure.
Yes.
I think we need to be more confident about who we are. And I think that IK story comes in there. And I don't think anybody who says to us that that is narrow nationalism is appreciating who we are.
But from a governance perspective, is it as easy to navigate as it would sound in the personal space? Because I think in the personal space, it's almost easy to say, I will borrow now from what you're telling me. I'll take that information and I'll apply it in my life. But here, no, I'm going to draw a boundary. This is rubbish. I'm not taking this in. From a governance perspective, when do you make that decision? I will borrow. No, this.
I'm not sure it's very different. It's funny, I'm smiling because we were having this conversation earlier this week and saying that, what is it that goes wrong when Africans go into government, right? So like the guy who was such a good civic leader, who was such a good guy, suddenly goes there and you're just shocked at the decisions they're making, right? And I was saying that maybe when we are then told, running a country is not like running a village or like running your family. Well, maybe it should be. Because maybe the nonsense you're doing there, you would not do in your village or in your home. And so maybe we shouldn't buy into the narrative that it's that different.
Yeah.
Because if you are in your village, in any case, we talk about as though in your village, the chief can just decide everything. In which village?
No.
You don't. And
there's
so
a council,
actually we understand. What's the difference then in government? You've got parliament, you've got your peers. There's no difference actually. I think that we've created accountability-free zones where people can go and act in some other way. And the excuse is that's governance. That's not what governance means. And I'm pretty sure at the School of Governance, they would agree that there isn't an accountability-free zone where you get to apply different values and different standards and different ethics just because you're in governance, which you would never apply in your community. And I think that's also what's creating this democratic distance, this governance distance between those who we elect to lead and the people, because the people are a bit surprised. They're like, what's this person now doing?
Who are you?
Who are you? And and when did you change? I think we need to connect back to ourselves.
Okay. Interesting. Cool. Any closing remarks on the first paper? Are you good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's a good paper, and I think it gives us some direction. And I think from the perspective of calling for balance, I think it's a paper worth reading.
Paper 2 is AI safety AI safety governance in the global South. This paper zooms out to a wider global South comparison, 8 countries across Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, the Southeast Asia. And the question here is, are these countries safe? I think essentially this is what this paper is essentially asking, and it's not asking safety in the sense of just economics, but technically are these countries in a safe place? Are there frameworks in place preventing AI from doing harm? When you look at Mauritius and Brazil, they do have some bone. They do have something that they've got going on, meaning there's a bit of safety there that they've managed to build around. When you look at Haiti, South Sudan, Myanmar, they have nothing. There's some bad happening there. And in the case of Myanmar in particular, AI technologies are actively being used for state civilians, and that is problematic, and against ethnic minorities as well. So, if you are in Myanmar, how are you thinking about the future of AI in that area? If this is what's happening, there's no protection, there's no recourse, there's no account, nothing, zero. And you're being surveillanced, there's surveillance everywhere, minorities are being marginalized. What are you thinking as this is presented to you? AI future.
And I think that might be the this idea of the weaponization or it being used against the citizenry is a concern among a number of African countries. I don't think the Myanmar example is unique in that sense. I think it's problematic, especially if you want to talk about how you democratize these conversations about AI, if from the perspective of a citizen, actually they feel like a victim, even of their own government, then I think it's really difficult to talk about how do we co-produce AI policy, how do we imagine positive AI futures. I think the future probably looks quite dim. But again, I think it's important that we look at these things in context. Because obviously we're calling for sovereignty. It also means that people are sovereign to decide how they want to do things. And I'm not saying that there's a consensus in Myanmar that people ought to be surveilled by their government. But I'm just saying, if I can bring this to Africa, a common comparator often is, say, between South Africa and a Rwanda, for example. And then the differentiator becomes democracy, right? So here you can ask the questions and there maybe you can't. No, you can't. But there they get to move faster on certain things.
Yes, and then we are slow.
Maybe not with a lot of voice, but maybe, people say, well, you can't eat democracy. So maybe some people think that's better. I think here you get into what's the consensus in a society? What is the social contract? What is it that people agree that as a society, this is what we want, and this is how we are going to proceed. I think that becomes important in whether people can construct positive AI futures, even if they may not be what we think they should be, because we're also applying our own judgment on what we think is positive or not. I mean, China is obviously the very big example often in this. So everybody says, oh, you don't want to be like Chinese, you don't want to be a surveillance state. Well, I guess you have to ask Chinese people.
Apparently there's a system there of incentives that's working and some of the people are happy. But when you talk about who consents to this, the question then becomes, how many voices can you get to? When you're saying, are the people happy with the status quo? Which people are you referring to? Which people are you reaching out to? And I mean, is it even possible that you can get to the entire population of whatever the country is, or should you look at the needs of the country from an economic perspective?
Well, in electoral democracies, we say it is those who vote, and what they are voting in is the consensus, right? Now, of course, there are many problems with that. I mean, already if your voting is close to 50-50, then we're not sure. It means half are unhappy and half are happy. So there's that.
A 51% win doesn't mean much,
then you've got the places that have 98%. Is that possible? So Rwanda is a 90-something% democracy. So I don't know, is it possible? Is it not? Or then you've got the ones where you don't ask. So in China you don't ask, you trust the government.
Okay. Now there are two conversations here around AI. The global north are more on what do they call it? Super intelligence.
Yes, sure.
The global north is talking about super intelligence. That's the safety concerns that they've got, existential risk. This is the kinds of conversations that a Geoffrey Hinton would talk about a lot. But when you come to the global south, a farmer in Muleji tried to get credit score, an algorithm decided, not you. All right. So where should we be concerning ourselves as a developing economy?
Yeah. So here you'll get different opinions. I know there are some people who feel that for Africa, talking about AGI is far out there and we should be worried about more basic things. I'm actually giving a talk this afternoon based on a paper that I've been working on with Benji Rosman, the one who's heading up the AI committee. And we have been talking about 3 levels of thinking about AI. I'll be happy to share it with you if you want.
Please.
We say at a first level, there's everyday AI concerns today. And those are many of the AI conversations we're having. AI is stealing jobs. AI is refusing to register people because of either biometric or other biases built into the system. There are all of those kinds of issues. That we would call level 1.
Sure.
And we have to deal with level 1 because it's very real for many people. But that level is moving fast. And I think faster than we admit. Level 2 would be where already there are things that are going to change, transform. And maybe AGI and superintelligence may reside on level 2, or maybe jobless futures also are in level 2, where it's not just about AI stealing jobs today, but it's to say actually we face futures where what you call a job today, and you've heard these projections, right? So where those projections play out, and maybe that's a 5-year, maybe 10-year. I think Benji's saying now he thinks it's 5 years. But yeah. So, but it's out there. But it is in a way a different context where things have already changed. You're not trying to save jobs. You're living without jobs. So what does it look like to live in that world? What does it look like to live in a world where we agree that the computers are smarter than us and we don't even bother to try to do certain things? But what is it then that we are doing?
Yeah.
How do we coexist with that technology? Some people calling 5IR or even 6IR. So that's in a way level 2, and we would argue we're not doing enough thinking as Africans in level 2. We're so busy with level 1 that we're not necessarily already thinking about what does that second horizon mean for Africans, not just as victims, but also as proactive actors with agency. Level 3 is my favorite level, not one that Benji loves. I think he'll say that himself. But it's the level that also asks the question, and beyond just what happens to us and how the world changes, what is the bigger universe of who we are and what it is we think we're doing? So where our human consciousness, our ontological sense of being, the world we want, the things that matter. And there you've been hearing people talk about more than human.
Yeah.
So we're not the only beings on this planet, actually. And we may not be the ones to survive. But what does it look like to think about the bigger universe that we occupy when we start going into outer space as a physical example, but also other space as a almost a sort of a sense of being? Our indigenous knowledges, by the way, allow us to be comfortable in that third level because we think about these things deeply. And we are saying maybe you need to think across all of these 3 levels. We're not proposing it as a policy framework. It's more a research framework. It's to say we need to do research across all of these. Otherwise, we're very stuck in thinking that we're dealing with today's issues or we're dealing with 10 years issues. But actually, we're also dealing with a question of who we are in the grand scheme of things.
Sheesh. Of the 3 levels, which is more urgent for Africa?
I think all of them are urgent because I do
they should
think
all happen at the same time.
I think that's because this level 1 is affecting people now on the streets. People are losing jobs. I think industry is using the excuse of AI to kick people out of jobs. So there's very real politics, in the now. We have to think about that next level because some things are fundamentally shifting. And I think we all feel it. You can kind of sense that, this is a game. When you say game changer, what do you mean? We have to think about that state where the game has changed. So we have to think about level 2 as well. And I think we don't do enough of that. That does require projection. It does require moving beyond bread and butter today. So there's some, I would say, privilege in being able to do that kind of thinking, but we've got to have our researchers, our thinkers, our leaders thinking on that level about what's next for Africa, right? Where things have changed. So we need to do that. Otherwise, we're waiting for it to happen to us. So we have to do that too. And then I think level 3 is when we talk about our indigenous knowledge. I think that's where we are strong. That's where I think as Africans, we have the capacity to engage with bigger questions at the same time. So I don't think it's choosing levels. I think that for us, that might be our comparative advantage, is that I think we are able to do all 3.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. We are quickly running out of time.
Right.
So I'm going to jump to paper 3, digital transformation in the CMAC.
Yeah.
This is a ground level paper where the other papers are dealing with frameworks and theory. This one looks at digital transformation and in the actual practice of it. Now we're looking at 6 African countries: Cameroon, Central African Republic, Chad, the Republic of Congo, Equatorial Guinea, and Gabon. In the paper, we see that the internet penetration ranges from 72% in Gabon to about 14% in the Central Republic. 68% of CMAC public administrators lack basic digital competencies. So the paper also services something important about politics and digital change. Informal power brokers within the bureaucratic landscape resist digitalization because their influence depends on controlling access. This is not an AI problem.
Yes.
However, it affects how we deal with these technologies.
Absolutely.
Where do you even start in this case, where the people that the clerk is incentivized to keep the stamp, because if I give you my stamp, I get $5. If I give you this form, I get to sell it maybe $10. how do you have this conversation at that level such that it makes sense and I get to relinquish my power and go, okay, my stamp I'll put in my cupboard and collect dust?
So this is what earlier when I was talking about old problems,
yes.
This is where old problems meet new opportunity. So these issues of the administrative power of the clerk or poor infrastructure, because we also talk about that, just a lack of infrastructure or just a lack of skill and understanding. And then I think also what this paper strongly foregrounds are the fact that these things are not even across the continent. I would say not even across the continent. I would say even within countries. So although this is comparing countries, I think if you even take South Africa and you compare going into any administrative office, say in a Joburg versus in Umtata, there's certain things are going to be different.
Of course,
quite
a lot.
Yeah. And those inequity, those differences, those different power, it's power with a small p, those different power interests and how things change or resist change, those dynamics also of the fact that the infrastructure is not the same in the first place, therefore the incentives and the capabilities are not the same. All of that matters. I think what this paper reminds us is that those historic weaknesses and inequities obviously are still there even when you go digital, and they'll play out in different ways. They'll affect your possibilities in different ways. I feel like the opportunity of this reminder is twofold. One is to remember who we are. We have to develop policies and practices for context. You cannot be designing for world-class standards, and I think the previous paper also speaks to that. You cannot be designing for Finland when you are in Editia. You cannot. You cannot apparently if you're in Chad. You've got to recognize where you are. Context is important, and we've got to design systems and processes for where we are. Having said that, I think we also have to be serious about what tech enables us to do. There's certain things that we could use to transform these problems. And it's not even the highest of tech in some cases. No. I think there are things we could do that don't make it your decision whether you bring out a rubber stamp or not. And I think we've got to be serious sometimes about things. We capitulate to some rather silly things. But if you know that people are playing petty politics that are affecting people's lives just because they are exerting their little power on people, I think there are things that technology allows you to bypass as well. But how we do that and what those opportunities are for transformation through the digital, not for the digital, through the digital, are very contextual. And I think we should be doing more experimentation with that.
So what I find the paper does, I think it's also warning us, cautioning us against putting the cart before the horse in many instances, where we are trying to keep up with the world, but not looking at our house to say, but this is what we have going on here. Absolutely. We have legacy problems, we have infrastructure problems. And when we look too far ahead, we leave certain problems here that would otherwise not even catch up to these things that we are trying to keep up with. But how do you strike that balance? Again, almost a question of, in the previous paper, we were asking, how do you determine when to borrow and when to keep in-house? But in this instance, how do you strike that balance to say, yes, let's keep moving along and trying to keep up with the world, but at the same time, let's clean up our house. What is of importance here? As the world keeps moving and we are stuck with our historical problems, infrastructure, how do you strike that balance? How do you move as a country?
Look, tough question. I think no easy answer, but I think that's what I mean by how do you transform, not for the technology, because that thing of trying to keep up with the rest of the world, it's almost assuming that the technology itself is something that we have to reach. We've got to chase that thing. And I'm saying, can we talk about how do we use that thing for what we're trying to do? And what we're trying to do is to get foundations right. I feel like there's a slight twist of the hand there that matters, that we're not using technology just so that we can tick a box to say we're using technology and we're with the rest of the world and we are high tech. We're using technology to address the problems we actually have. So we're working with the technology. I think we need to see more of that. I think we've skipped many steps. So Ologbenga Adeshida and I, who write a lot about innovation in Africa, and we've just released, by the way, our third book on Transformation Africa. One of the things we talk about is exactly that we don't seem to maintain some balance between high tech and low tech. The low tech perhaps being important for addressing the conditions we are in, because we are so keen on doing things that have, in ways that have been defined for different conditions. So I think what I would recommend for any country that is finding itself at that, and I think they were saying we've got low, middle, and high tier countries in terms of performance. Well, if you're in the low tier, I think you've got to talk about how do we deal with these conditions. And if your conditions are a lack of basic infrastructure, a lack of basic skill, how could technology itself be part of the solution to that? Not so that we can say we are using high-tech technology, but so that we can address our skill issue, so that we can address our infrastructure issue. What are the bypasses and hacks that are possible? We are innovators, I believe, in terms of coming back to who we are. But I think we've forgotten to innovate because we're busy chasing other things.
Trying to keep up
with the Joneses.
Since research from Central Africa found that even where online government services exist, people from the rural area, women and poor people cannot access them. So should fixing inequality be the first goal of AI policy, or something to consider after the economy grows?
I think that's a good question, because there's been a very big push around online services and digitizing services. And as you're saying, I mean, some of the stats here were a bit surprising about the low levels of internet penetration. So what's the point of putting all of your services online if only 14% of the population is actually online? Again, and I know this might begin to sound like I'm saying everything is at the same time. There's a movie called Everything All at Once or something like this.
Yes.
Yes. Something like this, yeah. And I actually feel, unfortunately, that's the answer to a lot of things. You have to do everything at the same time. I think that digitalizing certain services is an important thing to do. Maybe I'm countering what I just said previously. We can't just be doing it for the technology. But I do think that we already had a problem with rural access. So I don't think, unless we are preparing ourselves to be able to reach rural places in ways that we've never done before, but obviously putting certain things online is one of the ways. So virtualizing services is one of the ways to reach people, but it doesn't work if people are offline. I think then that causes you to address getting people affordable access more quickly. I don't actually think in that case you don't digitalize the services, because you are not reaching people anyway. So I think somehow it's a bit of both. I think you have to do both things. I think you have to talk about where does the virtual give you an advantage in terms of reach, and then you have to make sure that once you reach people, they can access it. And so you have to do both. I think sometimes we do one and not the other, and that's the problem. But I think, and obviously that reach, that access bit, and I think one of the other papers you'll come to in the series does talk about access and inequalities in access. I think that itself also creates opportunities for us to think about how we cost services, what are low-res ways to actually expand access, how do we use, if necessary, old tech, how do we use sort of, what do you call it, text-based, sorry, the words are leaving my head this morning. But how do we basically use whatever it is that we need to use in order to reach people, even if it's old-fashioned SMS-based, USSD, even if it's USSD services, even if it's WhatsApp, and if that's the one that's more possible. Do you need to develop your own system? Maybe. I don't know, Morse code, use whatever, but just use what you need to then make sure that you create the access somehow. So I think let's be creative and think about how we do both. I think to simply say we don't digitalize because of deep rural populations, we have to remind ourselves we were not reaching those populations in the first place.
Yeah, it's important to reach them where they are, right? And with the technologies that they have access to. Don't try and shoehorn a different technology to where they are. There's no access to 5G network in the rurals. Why would you want to send them AI there? Send USSD, send them to zero-rated.
Zero-rating that addresses the cost issues.
So you have to build a system that will work in those environments. Again, it's that question of catching up and how you catch up and what you put in place in order for people to come along. If you move too quick, you leave people behind. If you don't set enough systems in place for people to catch up, then what are you really doing?
Understanding our geographies is also, so I'm an urban planner, is one of my disciplines, and I feel like the other thing we don't talk enough about, we talk about countries as though they're all the same. South Africa is particularly complicated, obviously, because people, because of apartheid, are scattered in problematic ways. So, you've got like 20 people somewhere in the Northern Cape. You've got, and you have to reach all of those people. And this presents particular problems. Not all countries have that. And so I think you've got different, if you want, spatial issues that countries deal with, but those spatial issues create the need for different kinds of attention. And I think we have to respond to that. So context.
The last paper, and I think maybe my favorite, the Digital Transformation and Governance, a bibliometric review. I had to Google what bibliometric meant. So in this paper, 417 studies were done on digital transformation and governance in Africa. Essentially, the question asked here is, what has African scholarship actually said about this? Who is saying it? And what is missing? Publications only start appearing from about 2017. This is what the study shows us. And mainly the scholarly conversation about digital governance in Africa is less than, say, about a decade. South Africa dominates the literature, with Nigeria in a distant second. Most South African authors publish alone, with minimal international collaboration. So we are trying to regulate, create frameworks and governance in a space that's still a baby to academia. So how do we regulate what our Einsteins have not yet figured out?
So bibliometric reviews, I suppose. So bibliometric is like bibliothèque, like library, in, I guess, French or in other languages. It's an important method because it allows us to understand some of those things that, where the literature lies and who's creating it and all of that and who's not, and whose voices are coming through. But in a way, what it also does, and I think it makes this point about this steep incline recently of the publications. So now in the last few years, we're beginning to see a lot more, and we will see a lot more. What it also shows is the lead times, though, to how research is done and how research comes out. Even these working papers, we're talking about them now in May 2026. I mean, some of these papers were written more than a year ago. But that's how long it takes for academic stuff to come out. In fact, this is fast in the grand scheme of things. For things to come out in journals can take 2 years,
2 years?
Sure. It can. By the time you submit to a journal, you go through the journal review and you get published. Some of them are shorter, but it can be as long as 2 years. And then for a call for papers, where it means that you're attracting people to write papers that they haven't already written. So then they write them over a period of time, 6 months, 12 months. Then you begin the peer review process and the production process and all of that. The book or the product might come out 2 years later. So that means that what we consider to be knowledge sometimes has a serious time lag behind it. Now, obviously, that kind of lag is not helpful for a space that's changing quite quickly. So that's one of the things, unfortunately, I think that this kind of research might also show up, are those lags in when knowledge comes to the foreground. But I think what it also shows us is where activity, so this idea that South African papers are dominating, I think the paper also says, is not necessarily to say that South Africa has done the most research or had the most activity. What it's got to do is, I think we probably had the most policy space activity that might have led to response. Also, South Africans generally on the continent do publish more, Nigeria as well, Kenya as well, others as well. But there are different drivers as to why people tend to write more about certain topics and in certain ways. Maybe we have more funding as well to write about these things. I mean, just a working paper series like this can skew the numbers because we are going to put out 20 papers at a go. Now, the authors are not all from South Africa, but in many of these, they do tend to be very localized. So those things also affect what the numbers. But it does also mean, to answer your question maybe more directly, that, if you're going to rely on what articles say, you are a little bit behind. It's probably good foundational knowledge, but you needed to know quicker. And actually centers like Tayarisha are trying to be at the forefront of saying that, look, we've got to be quicker to decision makers, quicker to market. So
the data in this research also suggests that most of the publications happened around 2020. I'm wondering, what is it about COVID that we suddenly wanted to learn a lot about digital governance? Why are we seeing such high volume in the break of the pandemic? What was it about this pandemic that did this for us?
Probably many reasons, some related to the pandemic and some not. I would say the one related to the pandemic, as we all know, we all became more acutely aware of digital when we were forced into digital living, right? So I think there's something about just COVID, the lockdowns, the moving to digital on a real human level that made everybody understand, gosh, this thing is important. And maybe if you don't know how to use technology, you might be
very lonely.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's that. So I think there was a social awareness, an economic awareness of how important the digital is. And I think that gave a huge push. But I think we were already in a time when the digital was already picking up, right? So, I mean, a lot of the big AI developments that we're seeing, I mean, before COVID, we were already talking about maybe blockchain is important, maybe metaverse is important. So we were already talking tech for sure and digital tech. But I think that blip, maybe it's not the time for people to sit and write. Yeah, many of us, we were not going to work, so we had
started writing my own language.
You see, so
I picked up something.
Yeah, so I think there's circumstantial things, but also it was just the time already when a lot of these innovations and a lot of these tech changes were already in progress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, we have very few minutes. But the paper ends with a call for more African scholars, more Southern collaborations. But is this not just about who's writing? Could it also? Do we need to look at who is being studied in these papers, and whose experience actually gets to shape the research questions? It's very interesting that we have people from a particular country who are doing the studying, but who are they studying and whose story is shaping the narrative? How are we thinking about that as we putting this out?
And I'm glad you raised that, Stanley, because that's really important in the context of this paper in particular, because Taiwo, the author, begins by justifying the research on the basis that he's concerned with African urbanization and so basically what's happening in African cities, the smart city and all of that. And I think as soon as you frame something like that, then as you're saying, it's clearly not just about the technology or just about, who's writing papers. It's about the substance of what's actually happening in real places with real people. I don't think that's a dimension the papers or the particular research design goes into, but I think it really is a super important question, especially if you want to humanize that this is about cities and people who are living in places. I think you have to get into from whose perspective are these papers actually being written and who are they considering and in what ways. So I don't think it was a theme that was really a focus. It does focus on cybersecurity, the issues that Zandi was raising. I think that is there a little bit, but not so much on the human side of it.
All right, cool. Any closing remarks?
After all these research papers, are you more hopeful or less hopeful about AI governance in Africa than you were a year ago?
Than I was a year ago. Ooh, Zandi with the tough questions. I think I am more hopeful to the extent that we're being forced to have the conversations. I can't say glad, I'm even secretly, well, it's not going to be a secret after I say it now, I guess. But I'm also secretly glad that there was this about the policy and the hallucinating and all of that. Because I'm not happy because, it's obviously embarrassing, and it's embarrassing for all of us as South Africans.
But we're glad it happened early, right?
But it happened early. And I think that it makes us aware that there are difficult things that need to be done. And it's human beings that are making some of those decisions and mistakes. And maybe more of us need to be involved.
Yes.
And I think that more of us being involved in the conversations makes me a bit more hopeful, not because I think we will therefore win. So it's not a hope that says, I think we've got this, but it's a hope that says, at least we're talking about it and we're beginning to recognize that this is a conversation for everybody. It's not a conversation for one minister or one department at the university. This is a societal conversation, and everybody has a stake. And therefore, everybody has a right to voice into it. I think that is making me more hopeful if that's where we're heading, by recognizing that there are real challenges in our governance framework.
All right. This has been insightful. It's been great. Thank you. Thank you so much for making the time. I know you have to dash off right now. With like 5 minutes left. And Zandi, thank you so much for making the time to join us and co-host this episode with us. It's been a pleasure. That's been the Angle Podcast. Episode 2 will be coming up. It's still the Tayarisha series on AI in Africa. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you.
Thanks, Stanley. Thanks.
It was nice learning from you.